What happens when the world you know collapses, and you're left to navigate the ruins alone? Alma May felt the weight of that question pressing down on her like a heavy shroud. At just 19, her life had been a series of closed doors and whispered fears, each day blending into the next in a stifling routine crafted by her stepmother's cruel hand. Alma was a mix of strength and fragility, a young woman whose spirit had been dulled by confinement and isolation. Her dreams were simple yet profound, a longing to be seen, to be heard, and to escape the suffocating grasp of her stepmother's ambitions. Alma had never stepped outside the boundaries of her home in Clarksdale, Mississippi, except to collect water or run errand after errand. She had never tasted freedom, never felt the sun warm her skin while she danced in a field of wildflowers. Instead, she was raised like a doll, her voice silenced by the fear instilled in her by a woman who saw her as a means to an end. The promise of a good marriage was the only future her stepmother offered, a future where Alma would become a pawn in a game she did not understand. But when a white merchant began to visit their home, the stepmother's ambitions grew, and she saw in Alma an opportunity to elevate her own status in society. The moment of change came swiftly, like a storm breaching the horizon. The merchant's absence after Alma's unexpected pregnancy left her vulnerable and exposed. He had denied her, dismissed her, and in doing so, left a young woman without a name or a path. Her stepmother's horror at the scandal brought forth a decision that would alter the course of Alma's life forever. On a sweltering night, she was cast out like trash, placed in a cart with nothing but a small suitcase and her growing despair. Left on the sidewalk of a dilapidated bar, Alma was surrounded by the echoes of blues music, a haunting melody that resonated with her pain. Inside the bar, a man named Ezra Boone played, his fingers dancing across the guitar strings while his soulful voice poured out stories of heartache and survival. He was a man marked by loss, having surrendered his dreams to the weight of grief after his wife was taken from him by the cruelty of the world. To him, Alma was just another lost soul in a city that had seen too much suffering. But when he noticed her shivering, alone, and pregnant, he didn't ask questions. He simply offered her a seat and a warm meal, a small act of kindness that would set a chain of events into motion. Ezra took her in not as a partner, but as a fellow human being. In the cluttered back of the bar, he created a small sanctuary, one that was safe yet foreign to Alma. She had never known what it felt like to be cared for without the strings of expectation attached. As days turned into weeks, the two began to form an unspoken bond. Alma, who had been stripped of her agency and silence for so long, found herself drawn to the music that filled the air. In the rhythm of the blues, she discovered a voice that had lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. But the world outside was unrelenting. The specter of her stepmother loomed large, threatening to reclaim the narrative of Alma's life and the child she carried. The shame of her pregnancy would not be easily dismissed, and when Alma dared to step into the spotlight at a local festival, the repercussions were swift. Her stepmother emerged, dressed to impress and armed with a rehearsed smile, attempting to rewrite the story of betrayal. Yet, as Alma stood before the crowd, her burgeoning confidence took shape through the song she sang, Calada di Mentira. The power of her voice, raw and real, was a declaration of her identity, a rejection of the life that had been imposed upon her. In that moment, Alma transformed from a mere pawn in her stepmother's game into a force to be reckoned with, a woman reclaiming her narrative from the ashes of shame and despair. As her journey unfolded, the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but the music that had become her lifeline would guide her toward a future filled with hope. The echoes of her past would shape her, but they would not define her. As she learned To navigate the complexities of her new life with Ezra, she discovered that sometimes the embrace of kindness from a stranger could lead to the beginnings of something beautiful, an unbreakable bond, and a passion that would change everything. As Alma settled into her new life at the bar, the initial warmth of Ezra's kindness began to fade under the weight of uncertainty. The vibrant blues that filled the air with promise now served as a reminder of the precariousness of her situation. It wasn't long before the realities of her circumstances began to seep into her fragile cocoon. The days blurred into nights, and while she found solace in the music, the fear of her stepmother's return haunted her. She often awoke in a cold sweat, the echoes of her stepmother's voice scolding her, reminding her of the shame that had been thrust upon her. Alma's emotional landscape was a tumultuous sea, filled with waves of hope and despair. The crushing reality of impending motherhood weighed heavily on her. Each kick from the life growing inside her sent ripples of both love and fear coursing through her. What kind of mother could she be? The question gnawed at her insides, alongside the constant worry of how she would provide for the child. She had never had the chance to nurture herself, let alone another life. The small sanctuary Ezra had created began to feel less like a refuge and more like a gilded cage. Compounding her struggles, the bar was not a haven devoid of challenges. The patrons, a mix of locals seeking solace in whiskey and music, were a diverse tapestry of life, but they were also a constant reminder of the world outside. Among them was Marlene, a fierce woman with a heart of gold, who saw through Alma's fragile exterior. Marlene had carved out a life in the bar as a waitress, but she was also a mother, and her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through Alma's facade. When they first met, Marlene offered a sympathetic nod and a plate of food, but as the days passed, she began to probe deeper. "You're too quiet, honey. What's brewing inside that pretty head of yours?" Marlene's questions often left Alma feeling exposed, igniting a mix of gratitude and discomfort. Deep down, she wanted to confide in Marlene, to share the burdens she carried, but the fear of judgment kept her silent. Alma's reluctance to open up strained her budding friendship with Ezra, who, despite his gentle demeanor, had begun to show signs of frustration. He had extended a hand, yet Alma remained hesitant, trapped in a cycle of past traumas that made trusting others feel like a betrayal of her own scars. "You can't keep hiding, Alma. You're stronger than this," he urged one evening after a particularly difficult day. She had watched him pour his soul into the music, yet when it was her turn to share, she felt the words stick in her throat like thorns. The fear of vulnerability became a wall between them, one that threatened to shatter their connection. The tension in the bar intensified when her stepmother's shadow loomed closer, the first signs of her arrival rippling through the community. Whispers began to swirl, and Alma felt the weight of those murmurs like stones in her stomach. Rumors of scandals spread like wildfire, and she could feel the eyes of judgment upon her. The music that once soothed her now felt like a cruel reminder of the life she was trying to escape. When she ventured out for groceries, the glances from neighbors became daggers, piercing through her fragile confidence. Each encounter felt like a betrayal, a reminder of the life she had left behind and the past that refused to release its grip. In the face of this growing pressure, Alma found herself wrestling with her identity. The blues music that had once been her salvation began to feel like an echo of her pain. On one fateful night, she stood before a crowd once more, the same festival where she had first tasted the power of her voice. Yet this time, a storm brewed inside her, a tempest of doubt and fear. Could she truly reclaim her narrative? As she stepped onto the makeshift stage, the weight of expectation pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. But in that moment of uncertainty, she caught a glimpse of Marlene in the crowd, her fierce determination shining through the haze of judgment. With a deep breath, Alma began to sing, pouring every ounce of her heartache, her fears, and her hopes into the melody. As the notes flowed from her lips, she felt the chains of her past begin to loosen. The audience, once strangers, became a chorus of shared humanity, and for the first time, Alma felt the power of her own voice. It was a fragile yet fierce declaration of her existence, a reminder that even in her darkest moments, she was deserving of love and freedom. Yet, as applause filled the air, Alma could feel the storm outside brewing stronger. The stakes were rising as her stepmother's influence clawed at the edges of her new life. Would this newfound strength be enough to withstand the trials ahead? And would she find the courage to confront not only her past, but also the expectations that sought to bind her once again? The road ahead was treacherous, but as she stepped off the stage, a flicker of determination ignited within her. She would not let fear define her life any longer. As Alma stepped off the stage, the adrenaline from her performance surged through her veins like a wild river, yet the applause quickly faded into a haunting silence in her mind. The exhilaration was short-lived. She could feel the weight of her stepmother's impending arrival, pressing down like a storm cloud. The whispers she had felt creeping into her life were now sharper, more insistent, as if the very walls of the bar were closing in around her. Rumors of her past began to twist into caricatures, distorting her reality and painting her as the villain in a story she had never wanted to write. The following day, as she cleaned tables and poured drinks, Alma noticed Marlene's usual vibrant energy was dampened. "I heard your stepmother's back in town," she said, her voice low and cautious. "You need to be careful, Alma. She's got a way of turning people against you." The concern in Marlene's eyes struck a chord deep within Alma, a reminder that even the strongest bonds could be tested by the specters of the past. Marlene had her own struggles balancing work and single motherhood, but in that moment, it was clear that she was a pillar of strength for Alma, even as her own foundation seemed to tremble. Days turned into a blur of worry as Alma's dreams became haunted by nightmares of her stepmother's scorn. Each morning, she awoke feeling heavier, her body weary from the emotional strain. The physical toll was evident too. She found herself losing weight, her hands trembling as she poured drinks, and her voice, once a source of power, faltered at times, catching in her throat like a timid bird. As she watched the other women in the bar, Marlene, the seasoned waitress, and the younger singers who filled the space with laughter and energy, Alma felt a sense of isolation creeping in. The bar's atmosphere shifted as whispers of judgment intensified. Patrons began to voice their opinions about her, the air thick with tension and speculation. What does she think she's doing, trying to sing with a baby on the way? One man scoffed. "She doesn't belong here," another sneered. Each remark clawed at Alma's heart, each word serving as a reminder of her precarious status in that community. The nest of warmth she had begun to weave around herself felt brittle, ready to shatter with the slightest gust of wind. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, an unexpected visit turned everything upside down. One evening, as she was closing up the bar, the door swung open to reveal her stepmother, a figure draped in a fad of faint concern. "Alma, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "I've come to check on you. We've missed you at home." Alma's stomach twisted at the sight, a mix of anger and fear surging through her. Her stepmother's presence felt like a noose tightening around her throat, suffocating the small semblance of independence she had fought to build. The confrontation that followed was a minefield of emotions. Alma's stepmother brought with her a storm of accusations, clouding the air with threats wrapped in false affection. "You think you can escape me? You think you can raise that child alone? You're nothing without me," she spat, her words sharp and venomous. Alma's heart raced, a mixture of defiance and despair flooding her spirit. The words cut deep, and for a moment she faltered, nearly succumbing to the weight of her stepmother's manipulation. But in that moment of turmoil, something shifted inside Alma. She remembered the strength she had felt while singing, the support of Marlene, the kindness of Ezra. She wasn't alone anymore. "I am not your puppet," she declared, her voice stronger than she had anticipated. "I'm going to raise my child, and I will do it on my terms." The defiance in her words seemed to reverberate off the walls, filling the bar with a newfound energy. It was as if she had pulled a thread, unraveling the tapestry of her stepmother's control. Despite her newfound courage, the aftermath of that confrontation was a cascade of consequences. Alma felt the weight of her determination clash with the reality of her situation. With her stepmother's threats looming larger, she knew she needed to prepare for battle, to protect not only herself but the life growing inside her. Marlene stepped in during this tumultuous period, becoming a fierce ally. "You can't face her alone, Alma. We'll rally the other women in the community. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for all of us who've faced similar battles." Her unwavering support ignited a spark of hope within Alma, reminding her that the fight for her identity and her child's future was not one she had to face in isolation. And then there was Ezra, whose quiet strength began to shine through the fog of uncertainty. He had witnessed Alma's struggle, and the concern in his eyes spoke volumes. "You have a voice, Alma, not just when you sing, but in everything you do. Use it," he urged, his words a lifeline amidst the chaos. As the storm clouds gathered, Alma found herself at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of despair and empowerment. The stakes were rising, and the path ahead was fraught with challenges. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. With Marlene and Ezra beside her, she was ready to confront her past, to face the shadows that threatened to engulf her, and to embrace the strength that lay dormant within her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but Alma was determined it was time to reclaim her narrative. The following week unfolded with an intensity that left Alma feeling both exhilarated and terrified. It was clear that her stepmother was not going to back down easily. The whispers grew louder, and the tension in the bar became palpable. Alma had turned to Marlene and Ezra for support, their camaraderie providing a thin veil of comfort against the storm brewing outside. But as the days passed, Alma felt the weight of expectations crushing her spirit, urging her to retreat into the shadows rather than confront the looming threat head-on. Then, on a particularly chaotic evening, the turning point arrived. The bar was alive with music and laughter, but the atmosphere shifted when Alma's stepmother strode through the door, flanked by a couple of local gossipmongers who had eagerly joined her crusade. The laughter faded, and the air grew thick with tension. Alma's heart raced as her stepmother's gaze locked onto hers, a predatory smile creeping across her face. "Alma, my dear," she called out, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "I thought we could have a little chat about your choices." Alma's breath hitched in her throat. The laughter of the patrons felt like a distant memory as she felt every eye in the room turned toward her. It was as if the world had narrowed down to just her and her stepmother, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest like a heavy shroud. But in that instant, something within Alma ignited a spark of defiance pulsing through her veins. She could feel the support of Marlene and Ezra at her back, their silent encouragement fueling her resolve. "Leave me alone," Alma said, the words escaping her lips with an unexpected strength. The bar fell silent, the patrons hanging on her every word. "You don't get to dictate my life anymore." The room held its breath, caught between disbelief and admiration. Her stepmother's smile faltered, a flicker of rage crossing her features before she masked it with feigned concern. "Oh, sweetheart, you really think you can raise the child by yourself? You'll fail, just like you always do." Alma's heart raced, and doubt threatened to creep in. But as she stood there, with the weight of her past and the fears of her future colliding, she felt a shift within her. This was not just about her stepmother's words. It was about everything she had fought for, the independence she had struggled to carve out, the friendships she had nurtured, and the life that was growing inside her. "No," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "I won't fail. I have people who believe in me. I'm not alone." The patrons began to murmur, and Alma could feel the tide of support behind her. Marlene stepped forward, her presence a bastion of solidarity. "We're all here for Alma," she said firmly, her voice steady. "She's part of this community, and we won't let you tear her down." Ezra moved beside Alma, his quiet strength radiating through the room. "You've underestimated her," he added, his tone unwavering. "Alma has a voice, and she's ready to use it." The turning point crystallized before Alma's eyes. It was no longer just about her battle against her stepmother. It was a collective stand against the judgment and scrutiny that had plagued her life. The emotional weight began to lift, replaced by a burgeoning sense of empowerment. With every word she spoke, she felt the chains of her past weaken, the fear dissipating like mist in the morning sun. As her stepmother recoiled, flustered by the unexpected resistance, Alma felt a surge of relief and exhilaration. This was a defining moment, one that would not only alter the course of her life, but also reshape her understanding of her own strength. She was not a victim. She was a fighter, ready to reclaim her narrative, and she was not alone. The crowd erupted into murmurs of support, a tide of camaraderie washing over her. Alma's heart swelled with gratitude as she realized the power of community. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, a connection that transcended her fears. The path ahead was still fraught with challenges, but now it seemed illuminated by the lights of hope and solidarity. With her stepmother's presence now a mere shadow, Alma understood that she had crossed a threshold. The battle was far from over, but she had allies by her side, and together they would forge a new future. The implications of this turning point were profound. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where Alma would not only fight for herself, but also for every woman who had ever felt silenced. The climax loomed on the horizon, and Alma was ready to embrace it, her spirit ignited by the fierce determination to reclaim her life. The bar was buzzing with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration as Alma stood her ground against her stepmother. But the moment was fragile, teetering on a precipice of chaos. Alma knew that her stepmother wouldn't walk away quietly. She was relentless, and the stakes were higher than ever. As the crowd murmured their support, Alma felt a flicker of doubt creeping in. What if this was just the calm before the storm? Suddenly, her stepmother, narrowing her eyes, stepped forward. "You think you can justify me? I will make sure you regret this, Alma," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think they care about you? They'll turn on you. Just wait." The bar felt smaller, the walls closing in, and Alma's heart pounded painfully in her chest. The crowd's murmurs faded into a haunting silence, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the weight of her stepmother's words bear down on her. Panic threatened to engulf her, but she remembered the warmth of Marlene's hand on her back, the unwavering strength in Ezra's eyes. This was it. This was the moment where she would either reclaim her life or be crushed by the very person who had tried to control it for so long. "Alma, you don't have to do this," Marlene whispered, her voice barely audible above the tension. But as Elma looked around, she saw the supportive faces of her friends and the bar's regulars, people who had witnessed her struggles and triumphs. They believed in her. This was not just about her, but about everyone who had ever felt silenced. "No," Alma said, her voice rising with newfound conviction. "You don't get to intimidate me anymore." The words flowed from her like a river breaking free of a dam, the energy coursing through her, revitalizing every fiber of her being. "I have fought too hard to let you control my life. You may have tried to dictate my choices, but I am no longer your puppet." With each word, she felt the fear dissipate, replaced by a powerful surge of defiance. The crowd began to respond, a ripple of support building like a wave. "You're wrong," she continued, her voice strong and steady. "I have people who love me, who will stand by me no matter what. You've underestimated the strength of community, and you've underestimated me." The bar erupted into cheers, the patrons rising to their feet, clapping and shouting their support. The momentum was palpable, and for the first time, Alma felt invincible. But her stepmother was not ready to concede. "Community?" she scoffed, her voice rising in desperation. "You think they'll stick around when things get tough? You're a burden, Alma. You always have been." Alma's heart skipped a beat, but this time, instead of retreating, she stood taller. "Maybe I have been a burden to you," she admitted, her voice steady. "But I am not a burden to them." She gestured to the crowd who had rallied behind her, their faces filled with encouragement and solidarity. "I am choosing to be a part of something bigger than myself. I will not be ashamed of who I am or the choices I make." In that moment, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in her stepmother's eyes, a crack in the armor that had seemed impenetrable. The tension in the bar shifted, and for the first time, Alma felt the power of her own agency washing over her like a wave. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was standing up for every woman who had faced judgment, every person who had felt the weight of someone else's expectations. "Alma, don't do this," her stepmother pleaded, her voice now laced with desperation. "You'll ruin everything." But Alma was resolute. "No, I won't. I'm reclaiming my life, my choices, my future. And this time, I will not be silent." With those words, she stepped forward, the space between her and her stepmother shrinking. The crowd held its breath as the final confrontation crested. Alma didn't just stand against her stepmother. She stood for herself, for everyone who felt oppressed by someone else's narrative. The outcome was more than a moment of victory. It was a declaration of independence. As her stepmother turned and stormed out, the crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing in Alma's heart like a triumphant anthem. She had faced her greatest challenge and emerged victorious, not just for herself, but for the community that had rallied around her. In that uproar of support, Alma realized that she was no longer just a girl trying to carve out her own path. She was a woman, empowered and unafraid, ready to embrace the future with strength and courage. The battle was far from over, but now she had the tools, the friends, and the unwavering belief in herself to forge ahead. And with that realization, a wave of relief washed over her, transforming the bar into a sanctuary of hope and resilience. The cheers and applause echoed through the bar long after Alma's stepmother had stormed out, leaving behind a palpable sense of liberation. Each clap resonated with Alma's heartbeat, a reminder that she had taken a stand against years of oppression. As the adrenaline began to fade, she felt a mixture of relief and disbelief wash over her. She had finally confronted the woman who had tried to shape her life according to her whims, and now, standing in the center of the bar, she was fully aware of the weight of her victory. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the bar transformed. Patrons who had once whispered behind closed doors now openly celebrated Alma's bravery. The regulars who had watched her grow from a timid girl into a confident woman rallied around her, sharing stories of their own struggles against oppressive circumstances. Alma had unwittingly become a beacon of hope for those who felt voiceless. With every conversation, she felt the bonds of community tightening, no longer just a collection of individuals, but a collective force. Marlene, who had stood steadfastly by her side, organized a series of open mic nights at the bar, inviting not only Alma, but others from the community to share their stories through music and spoken word. These nights blossomed into a local phenomenon, drawing people from neighboring towns, each looking for a space to express their truths. Alma had inadvertently sparked a movement, the bar transforming into a sanctuary of self-expression and empowerment. Amid the growing excitement, Alma took time to reflect on her journey. She sat in the small office at the back of the bar, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and music that now filled the space. The memories flooded back her childhood filled with fear, the years spent in silence, and the moment she found her voice. She realized that every painful moment was a stepping stone leading her to this point. The sacrifices she had made, the battles she had fought, had not been in vain. They had shaped her into the woman she was today. She thought of her stepmother's words, how they had once stung her like a bee's sting, leaving her feeling small and worthless. But now they felt like a distant echo. Alma had discovered that true strength lay in vulnerability, in allowing herself to be seen, flaws and all. The fear that had once paralyzed her was now a mere shadow, overshadowed by the light of her newfound courage. As she prepared for another open mic night, Alma noticed Ezra in the corner, strumming his guitar and watching her with a proud smile. Their bond had deepened through this journey, no longer just mentor and student, but partners in the truest sense. He had taught her the importance of embracing her past while using it as fuel for her future. Together, they had created a space where people could come together, share their stories, and heal. With each passing week, the impact of Alma's actions rippled beyond the bar. The stories shared during open mic nights began to inspire change in the community. People started organizing workshops on self-advocacy, creating safe spaces for discussions on issues like mental health and domestic abuse. Alma found herself at the forefront of this movement, not as a leader, but as a participant, eager to learn and support others in their journeys. As she stood at the mic one evening, looking out at the sea of faces illuminated by the warm glow of the bar's lights, Alma felt a deep sense of gratitude. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. The weight of her past had transformed into a tapestry of lessons learned, connections forged, and lives touched. She realized that her struggle had not only liberated her, but had also empowered those around her to reclaim their narratives. In that moment, as she sang a new song born from her experiences, she felt an overwhelming wave of joy. The bar, once a place of confinement and despair, had become a sanctuary of resilience and hope. The air was thick with emotion, and Alma understood that her journey was just beginning. The challenges she had faced would always be a part of her story, but they would no longer define her. As the final notes of her song hung in the air, the crowd erupted into applause once more, but this time it felt different. It was a celebration of not just her triumph, but of a community that had come together to lift each other up. Alma smiled through the tears that threatened to spill over. She was home. And so, as the night wore on, Alma embraced her new reality, a life filled with purpose, connection, and the unwavering belief that together they could change the world, one song at a time. The horizon looked bright, and the possibilities were endless. This was her moment, and she was ready to seize it. You've witnessed how Alma's journey transformed her life and the lives of those around her, showing that standing up for oneself can light the way for others. Now, I want to hear from you. How did this story resonate with you? Have you ever faced a moment where you needed to reclaim your voice? Share your thoughts below, and let's create a space where our stories can inspire change. If you found value in Alma's journey and believe it can touch someone else's life, don't forget to like this video and share it widely. Lastly, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell to continue following more stories of resilience and hope. Your engagement makes this community truly special.